Hi, everybody. Thank you so much for watching my presentation, and I'm so happy to be here today, remotely, speaking to you about my own perspective in my high school years, especially this last year, and how that fits into the context of the Sustainable Development Goals. So first of all, I would just like to talk about why I think the Sustainable Development Goals are important to me and what I found to be interesting and important for the future, especially as I go along in my career. First of all, I'm a senior this year, so I'm going to be going to university next year, and I'm really excited to be majoring in potentially biology and public policy. These two fields of study are pretty different, but I think it'll give me an interdisciplinary approach that is so important when trying to solve the Sustainable Development Goals, because as we know, none of the sustainable goals kind of exist in isolation, so it's important to have the different skills to understand kind of a more interdisciplinary um, existence of the sustainable goals. And then secondly, at this point, I see my life project being democratizing access to research around the world, starting in Mexico. And I think that this is really important in the framework of the Sustainable Development Goals. And so let's get into the SDGs. So again, like my interdisciplinary approach to my own education, the Sustainable Development Goals are kind of the epitome of interconnected or even systems thinking. So we have 16 kind of main goals, and then the last goal, which is my personal favorite, is the 17th, partnership for the goals. Now, I think traditionally these are kind of more interpreted as partnerships between governments, between NGOs and governments, between private sector or private businesses. But I would like to propose that the 17th Sustainable Development Goal is also known as the one that kind of encourages people to have this interdisciplinary approach to thinking and to academia. So one of the most important questions that I think we should ask ourselves when thinking about the Sustainable Development Goals is, it may work in theory, but does it work in practice? I think that this is important because it understands that just because something might work in a lab or something might work in one country doesn't mean it has to work everywhere or across the board in the same way, right? So it's important to always ask ourselves, okay, so this solution works in theory, but let's see, how can we make it better so that it can work in practice in a specific community? So I would like to just first go into one of my favorite case studies ever. So this is a map of the prevalence of hepatitis B worldwide between the years 1965 and 2013. So as we can see, the countries that have the highest hepatitis B prevalence roughly correspond to the countries that are considered developing today. Of course, this has a few notable exceptions, but still, the countries that are more affected, that are most affected, like all of sub-Saharan Africa or Southeast Asia, those are also the countries that have maybe poor infrastructure, unstable governments, and just in general poor sanitation and health. So it's important to understand how those two factors correlate, because if we were thinking of how to even decrease the less than 2% prevalence in the United States for hepatitis B, or even in Mexico, the solution would be very different because we do have access to vaccinations, to medicine, all of that, whereas in those countries that are most effective might not have access to those important resources. So in around the 1990s, a professor at the Arizona State University of Charles Arnson came up with an amazing solution to this problem. He was traveling to Thailand, specifically Bangkok, to understand problems in vaccination and limitations to kind of preventing a worldwide pandemic of hepatitis B. And so while he was in Bangkok, he saw a woman feed her baby a piece of banana to kind of soothe the baby, and he thought, why can't we incorporate the vaccine directly into the banana? So as a biologist and as a geneticist, he then developed a banana vaccine that safely delivers and effectively delivers the hepatitis B vaccine. And he used this doing genetic modification. The advantages of this solution, as William Langridge of the Scientific American magazine said, the advantages would be enormous. The plants could be grown locally and cheaply using the standard growing methods of a given region. Now, let's go back to this map. Also, coincidentally, the countries that have the highest prevalence of hepatitis B correspond to the countries that live in tropical climates. Now, I don't honestly think that this has like one has to do with the other kind of very directly, but it's great for the banana vaccine because in a tropical climate, bananas are a lot easier to grow. So I just wanted to talk a bit about what specific sustainable development goals this solution, this banana vaccine, tries to solve, or tries to reach. So first, the most obvious would be the third goal, which is good health and well-being. With an increase in vaccination, especially in children, you can greatly decrease the prevalence of hepatitis B. But then also more indirectly, I believe, this has to do with decent work and economic growth. And when you have to grow a certain crop of genetically modified banana trees, you are creating jobs in those communities that have to then tend to those plantations, then like make sure that the bananas are safe and ready to eat, all of that kind of stuff. You're creating jobs that will then help economic growth and just kind of democratizing or leveling the playing field, right? It's no longer, oh, the UN goes and saves these countries. It's like, let's equip these communities with the resources they need to kind of save themselves in a way. And then industry, innovation, and infrastructure is the ninth goal. And I put this down because of the way that this problem was solved. So this is just a great example of how this landmark research paper that was published in this landmark kind of case then can provide a better future for other solutions, especially medical solutions in the genetically modified field. I believe the banana vaccine helps to reduce inequalities, especially when we're talking about inequalities that stem from a high prevalence in hepatitis B. When you have a country that has an especially high prevalence in any sort of disease, you're hindering your economic productivity, your human productivity, and your quality of life. Also, I believe that the banana vaccine tries to achieve the 12th goal of responsible consumption and production because just the simple fact that bananas are biodegradable, whereas plastic and metal, which are used in traditional vaccines, are not. I put partnerships for the goals in terms of like an American scientist went to another country and was working closely with local governments and with the local communities to understand their specific needs. So that in and of itself is creating partnerships to then solve a problem. I do have to say that this banana vaccine never actually kind of came into the real world. There were around 3 very successful clinical trials performed where they saw around 95% success rate, and it was basically just as good as a traditional vaccine. However, the main obstacle that the scientists face is just a lack of investment, a lack in private investment. And this is mostly because pharmaceutical companies are mostly interested in investing in edible vaccines if it's for livestock. I mean, this is clearly a solution that could work. There isn't any like scientific barrier to implementing this solution. There's been many successful clinical trials, and scientists pretty much have come to a consensus that this vaccine would do great things. But it makes me sad that the private sector is kind of determining whether this banana vaccine gets implemented in the developing countries that need it most. So I guess the solution or the lesson that it should be learned from this is that I feel like there should be more funding, especially for these kinds of projects, maybe from the United Nations or from government specifically, not the private sector, but the public sector. Because I mean, this is a public health crisis, so the people who should be funding it should be invested in public health. So anyway, I hope that in the future the United Nations does decide to move this project forward, as it's been around 30 years since it was first developed. So I mean, it seems about as good a time as any to start giving people banana vaccines. So I also just wanted to talk about why I thought that this solution or this project was especially exciting to me and especially perfect, kind of, or close to perfect in theory, because it really could never be put into practice. And I believe that this is because the scientists really understood 3 main factors that influence the problem and then should thus influence the solution. The first being society. I mean, the scientists definitely had to know the specific societal challenges that people in the developing countries face. And I mean, it's quite clear that the main scientists went to one of these developing countries and actually got the idea of a banana vaccine from an interaction between a mother and a child that he witnessed. So it was clear that this project was well rooted in understanding the specific context of a community. They went to the actual source of the problem to try to understand the society and culture of that nation. or of those nations, then also the politics. And by this, I mean that it's very important to understand maybe the approval process of a vaccine for each country, but beyond that, understand the lacking political intervention, especially in developing countries where maybe the country itself, the government itself, doesn't have the resources to then ship out traditional vaccines. So you have to understand why the problem is happening. It most likely has to do with the lack of infrastructure, especially once you get out of the cities and you go into rural areas. Just the access to public health or to public health resources like hospitals and doctors decreases dramatically. So it's important to understand kind of the government failures in that region or in that sector. And then finally, for this case specifically, just understanding the science behind vaccination, behind genetically modifying organisms. And so this is kind of like, I would say, the bottom stone, not the most important, but the one that like they couldn't have implemented the solution if they didn't know how to genetically modify plants, you know? So I think it's very valid to also pursue science, pursue hard data when talking about these solutions, and then kind of build on top of that. Say, okay, we have the solution, but how can we tailor it to meet the needs of a specific community? Or al revés, we have the understanding of the community. Now, how can we use science to create a beautiful solution that is the best fit for that community? Okay, so this this beautiful, amazing project that I absolutely love just highlights my love of case studies in education, especially in education, and especially when learning about the 17 Sustainable Development Goals. I believe that in a traditional education environment like ASFG, it is very important to look at case studies in tangent to also looking at the theory, right? Like, again, we go back to that original question. It may work in theory, but does it work in practice? And I think that studying case studies like the banana vaccine can provide us with a better understanding of the world as it is, you know, like with the bad parts, with the scary parts of, wow, the pharmaceutical companies don't want to fund this incredible idea. But that's very important knowledge to understand, because then knowing that in the future, maybe we can get the banana vaccine funded because we already know not to go ask the pharmaceutical companies. So it's kind of like a common knowledge. We're learning from past failures. And I think that case studies also provide the student a unique learning experience in understanding how solutions should be created for the specific problem. And I think that this banana vaccine is the perfect example of that, because it takes into account so many of the specific factors of the affected communities to then create the perfect solution. I also believe that case studies are essentially the work of the United Nations. United Nations resolutions, especially when they're a bit more specific, like, I don't know, addressing the Rohingya crisis, when they're kind of more specific to one community, they're basically taking a case study and trying to find the best solution. And they're taking into account the complex arguments of each country in the General Assembly or in the Security Council. So I think that the United Nations is also perfect for understanding. I mean, I guess this is obvious because they created the SDGs, but I wanted to highlight how the United Nations already kind of uses this approach of using a case study or using a specific problem to then come up with a solution. For this past year, I was co-secretary general with Ana Paula Albanese, and we organized Guamun 2020, which was a conference in January of around 200 delegates from all around Mexico. And it's a traditional MUN environment where practically it's model United Nations, so you're just simulating the United Nations. But we really wanted to emphasize the SDGs in our conference, especially considering that they are supposed to be achieved by 2030, so we have 10 years left. So we did this basically in three main ways. First of all, we made it the theme of our conference. We tried to just set the stage and set the tone of like, this is what we're going to be talking about all conference long. Whether you're talking about refugees, whether you're talking about illegal drug trafficking, whether you're talking about climate change, whatever the topic, you're always focusing your solutions on the SDGs. And I think that this is quite intuitive and perfect for MUN, because that's kind of what case studies that's kind of what resolutions already are doing, right? So by making it the theme of the conference, I think it just helped the students connect this kind of theoretical concept of the SDGs to actual work that they can put down on paper. Secondly, we also organized a panel of experts, which was just a short 1-hour conference in the middle of the general Guamun conference. And we invited around 5 to 6, I don't remember exactly, Guadalajara like community leaders, And we chose these people who are leaders of various different projects, and we wanted them to talk about kind of the interconnectedness of their own projects, right? Or in between projects, to highlight the importance of the 17th Sustainable Development Goal, which is partnerships for the goals. And just also highlight and celebrate some amazing people within our Guadalajara community. And then finally, the week before Guamun, we created a poster display highlighting, I believe, around 13 or 14 different projects done here at school that are already working towards achieving a sustainable development goal. So I have provided an example here. This was the poster that was created for the ASFG new campus, the LEED certification especially. And at the top, we can see over here, we have the 4 different goals that it tries to achieve. And this was really important to highlight because it's not like any one project just answers one or just tries to achieve one goal, right? That's the beauty of them. They're so interconnected that you can solve many with just one project. And this poster display was honestly just meant to celebrate the community and just take a minute to pause and say, like, yes, there's so much to be done and we have an overwhelming amount of work, but also go us, you know, like clearly we're already thinking about these problems and clearly this is our priority as a school. So, I mean, I appreciate that, you know, as a student and soon to be graduate of ASFG. Wow. I really do appreciate all the work that's being done around the school, and my experience has been marked by that. I've been here since nursery, and in every single grade without falta, sorry, my Spanglish. In every single grade, I've always had an opportunity to get involved in the community, to come up with my own solution to a problem that the world is facing. So that's basically what we're already doing. And then also just celebrating the community, you know, like being able to see like, oh, elementary is doing that. Because sometimes I feel like I don't know what's going on in elementary or even in middle school or even in the grades below me, and vice versa probably. So it's just nice to kind of come together as a main community, as a massive community. And then finally, just how can we improve our projects? I feel like when you have the project on the board and you have other projects around it, you can really start to think, hey, doesn't this project also have to do a lot with sustainable development goal number whatever? And in that way, we can just improve our projects to meet more SDGs than they do currently. And I just wanted to conclude this presentation with a reflection as why I believe it is so important to teach the SDGs in schools. Now, I know that most teachers, and especially like in my own experience, most of my teachers have at least mentioned the SDGs in our classes. So I think you guys are all doing a great job. I just wanted to offer this as more of a reflection as to why I think that they've been important in my education. I think that these SDGs really highlight problems that we were already thinking about, right? I mean, we didn't need the SDGs to tell us that world hunger was a problem or to tell us that gender equality needs to be improved or to tell us that education in developing countries must be improved, right? We all knew that those things needed to be done, that needed to happen. But I believe that the UN created a more comprehensive approach to solving these issues. Instead of looking at the million specific issues, you look at 17 massive kind of goals, and they're also interconnected. So it just seems more doable. At least to me, in my experience, when I look at these 17 goals and I go, hey, with one project, I can already work towards so many of these goals, it gives me kind of an uplifting feeling. And then secondly, they're just really important because they were created by the United Nations, and the United Nations is kind of the highest power in the world. I mean, arguably, but in theory. And so them creating it kind of provides a global framework, a global conversation that we can all participate in, where we all know the terminology, we all are kind of trying to achieve the same things. And I think that's really powerful, you know, that kind of consistency across the board, across continents, across countries, provides a better framework moving forward. How can we achieve these goals? Well, with community. And I think that these are very important goals to teach in schools, especially at ASFG, because it equips us to better understand our world. When we understand, especially case studies, of the sustainable development goals, we really can see the limitations and the successes and learn from both. And just thank you so much for coming to this virtual presentation.
We'll be able to go back and look at all of the videos in case there was 1 or 2 or 3 that you maybe wanted to look at later on. And we do want to be extremely respectful of everybody's time. But if anybody has any comments, any reflections, any comments, anything that they want to ask to Carly, now is your chance to do so. And I believe everybody, if you're muted, you can unmute yourself, I believe.
I just found it astounding that a project like that hasn't been funded after how many years?
Like 30, kind of. It was in the 90s.
I mean, holy smokes. I'm not surprised that the pharmaceuticals companies weren't interested, but you'd figure that somebody else would have.
Yeah.
I just don't know
definitely.
how that whole system works, but I'm astounded. Like, I was floored to hear
Well,
that.
I'm hoping to study biology and public policy, so maybe I'll do that.
Do something about it, Carly. Come on.
That would be fun.
Our hope rests with
All of the
you.
world's problems for us, Carly. You're on a good start.
No pressure, though. No pressure.
No.
No, I think it's awesome. I think you did a great job in the presentation.
you.
Thank you for that information.
Yeah.
I'm kind of with Pat that, but that's not. And I mean, I lived in Africa for 3 years and just seeing all that. I mean, yeah, great job.
Thank you. I really do think that so many of the solutions are there. I mean, it may just be me with my love of science in general, but I do think that most of our problems can be solved. It's just kind of like pooling your resources and doing the hard work.
Yeah.
I think another thing that I really appreciated, Carly, is, you know, in these last couple of years, you've seen a lot of countries kind of hunker down in this new wave of nationalism. And I think if there's one thing that this virus, you know, reminded us all, is that we are this interconnected community, this global community, and we do have to rely on each other no matter how far apart we are from each other to kind of handle this. But also, you know, something that can happen halfway across the world can greatly impact everybody. So it's a nice reminder when you're saying that, you know, it is, none of these problems are going to be solved unless it's locally, but also communal as well.
Yeah, definitely. And we're learning from the mistakes of other countries, right? I mean, we saw what happened to Spain and Italy and even China in the beginning stages, and we kind of learned from that. And I think that's also really powerful, you know, like learning from what hasn't been done in other places.
Yeah. The other thing is just, and I don't want to keep people, but the other thing that's fascinating towards the end, you know, that whole learning from mistakes, and it's that, you know, that thing that we teach from nursery on up with that growth mindset. It's hilarious how, you know, some of these things that we teach in early childhood, it's everything you kind of need to know, and we just ignore it all.
No, definitely. I mean, now that I'm a senior, I look back and I go like, wait, I've been taught this my entire life. I kind of feel like I'm preaching to the choir, you know? I mean, I know you guys already kind of do this. So, I mean, just thank you, honestly. Like my entire experience, I've been here every single year of my entire life. And in every single year without falta, like I said, it's always been an amazing experience of how can we help others.
It's good to hear that. Very good to hear that.
Great job.
Well, it's kind of, oh, sorry.
No, go.
I was just going to say, like, it's just nice to hear because I do teach in elementary, right? And like, it's like seeing you as a senior and even being here your entire life, or even if you were here for a couple of years, it's nice to know what's been instilled in you and then like where you're taking it next, right? So like as someone who teaches like little kids, like I'm hopeful for like a different future if we're able to like maintain and continue to teach these things, because like it is like the world will be different, but hopefully it'll be a good kind of different, like and if we do things like this, right, like this is a good start. So
yeah, definitely.
Thanks for sharing all of that stuff. Very
cool. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Carly.
No, thank you guys, seriously, for listening to me.
Congratulations. Well done.
Thank you so much. And then if they're just asking, in the next couple of days, there's a Padlet for the exit slip. The link's here. It's also probably on 13 other emails you'll receive. But, I'm not sending any of them. So I do appreciate your time. We really do appreciate your time. And we hope we made the best of a tricky situation, you know. So thank you, Carly, for taking a lot of the work off of our shoulders. And you probably did a better job than we would have done anyway.
And thanks, Sean, to you guys for continuing and organizing this and not giving up and letting it go, because I think it was
thank you.
Yeah.
All right.
Bye, guys.
Wow.
Bye.
Thank you.
Bye. Thank you.
Thank you.